Hey everyone, I recently bought Guardians of the Galaxy, and yes, I know I'm a few years late to the party, but I'm really excited to play it, so let's come and install it. Oh wait, my C drive only has 10 gig free. Ah, that's a pity, but luckily I got two NVMe drives, so I'm going to put on my other drive instead. 150 meg free, that got me right. Yeah, I installed Arc on it last night. Ah well, I can't play computer games, I'm just going to read instead. Wait, what am I doing? Reading makes you violent. I must find a way of playing video games. So here's a bunch of tips for getting more NVMe space inside your computer. I've actually got two computers, my workstation computer, and this comes with two NVMe slots in the motherboard, and my home lab NAS that comes with three NVMe slots in the motherboard, and actually that's my first tip, which might seem kind of obvious, but if you've got a motherboard with more than one NVMe slot, just buy a second NVMe drive and make sure you actually use that other slot. That's going to be the fastest and cheapest way of actually doing things. Now you might be thinking, well duh, I've already thought about that, but I'm not using that slot because it's only Gen 3 and that's too slow, so I'm looking for alternatives. But actually Gen 3 is still fairly fast. It can read data up to 3,500 megabytes per second, which is fairly fast. It's certainly enough for gaming, and obviously the other alternative is really to get like a SATA SSD or try and download and stream data over the network, and they're not great options either. So even if you have a Gen 3 NVMe slot, which both of my computers do in the final slot, that's still fairly fast for gaming. But obviously, if your motherboard only has like one NVMe slot, or maybe two and you find you need more, because you want to download more than like COD and ARC, then one option is to change your motherboard. And I know you're thinking that's a complete pain because you've got to take out the CPU heatsink and your graphics card and everything else, change everything, and you're basically back to square one. You're basically doing a fresh build. But it can only take a few hours if you know what you're doing, and often changing your motherboard to get more NVMe space is actually one of the best options open to you. The second tip though, if you need more NVMe space, is to consider going for a higher capacity NVMe drive. And this might seem like another, well duh type tip, I appreciate that, but at some point you might have looked at the price of 4TB drives, for example, and thought that's way too expensive. But actually often you can get 4TB drives for as little as £200 or $200, especially if there's a sale. The reason I say the 4TB drives might be worth considering is that often they have the best bang for your buck in my opinion. For example, a Crucial P3 Plus drive, if you look at a 1TB drive, they're around £60. The 2TB drives are then £105, and then the 4TB drives at the moment are around £220, which I appreciate that's slightly more than double the price of the 2TB drive, but it's not that much more. And often that 4TB drive does go on sale for less than £200, and that offers you quite good bang for your buck. If you load up your 2 or 3 NVMe slots with like 1TB drives, you're only going to be able to install like 1 or 2 games. Well, kind of kidding on that point, but you're not going to be installing that much. So if you want, genuinely speaking now, if you want more than 5 or 6 games being installed, you might want to look at above 1TB drives, and as I said, 4TB for me is the sweet spot. And yes, my workstation PC only has 2 slots, which gives me up to 8TB if I go for 4TB drives, but that is still quite a lot, and it will store quite a few games, joking aside. But if you've maxed things out, or you just simply don't want to change your motherboard, my third tip for you is to look at PCI Express NVMe expansion cards. So as the name suggests, these are actual cards that plug into your free PCI Express slots, if you've got any, and then you can put 1 to 4 NVMe drives in there. And they will cut down the bandwidth a little bit because unless you're using the top slot, which is the highest bandwidth one, you might only be limited to X4 or X1 speeds in the other PCI Express slots. But that's often fast enough for gaming purposes. But there's something really important you need to check before you run out and you go and buy a NVMe PCI Express card, and that is whether your motherboard supports BIOS bifurcation or not. What this is actually if your motherboard has, let's say, 2 free PCI Express slots, some motherboards give you the option of, instead of having one of them running at X16 speeds and one of them running at X1 speeds, so in other words the first one has 16 times the bandwidth of the second one, BIOS bifurcation allows you to run both slots at X8 speeds, for example, and every motherboard's slightly different here. But ideally, if you're going to run out and get one of these cards, BIOS bifurcation is a benefit because it allows you to have your graphics card in your main slot running at X8 speeds instead of X16, but that won't affect performance too much. And then you can have your PCI Express NVMe expansion card in the other slot running at X8 speeds instead of X1 speeds. And that then gives you a lot more bandwidth for those drives. And the benefit of having that option enabled is that the PCI Express NVMe cards that require BIOS bifurcation are often a lot cheaper because they need to do less work under the hood. So on Amazon I could go and get a good expansion card for around £22 right now from some random company, or if I wanted to get the Asus one, the Hyper M.2 Gen 4 card, that would be around £40 or £50, which again is pretty good. If your motherboard doesn't have BIOS bifurcation support though, it's not the end of the world, but it will cost you more money. For example, Sabrent has a pretty well-known PCI Express 4 NVMe slot card, but that costs around $179 or around £140 in the UK, which is quite a lot of money. Now, there is a really useful thread on the Server Home forums, which I'll link to in the description, which does show a few other options which might only cost around £100 to £150 instead of the Sabrent card, but that is still ultimately a fair bit more money than if your motherboard does support BIOS bifurcation. You can just go out and buy a random £22 card and leave your motherboard to worry about the actual splitting up of the bandwidth. The next option though is to actually rely on the fact that your computer will probably have USB 3 slots. You could go out and you could get a USB 3 based enclosure for NVMe drives, and this is actually for SD cards, but the point still remains. You can basically buy an external adapter which plugs into your USB 3 slot, and then you literally put an NVMe card into the enclosure. And that's a good way of actually getting more space. But there's a few things you should know. In fact, there's two main downsides, to be honest. Firstly, if your case only has USB 3.0 slots, then this option probably won't work too well for you. You'd probably be better off with just sticking a SATA SSD inside your computer, because speeds will be a bit too slow if you're relying on USB 3.0. Here's the other downside of these enclosures. Many of the reviews say that they don't actually get the speeds that they are advertised. And that's partly a problem with cheap budget NVMe USB enclosures, and it's also a problem with heat, because these enclosures, even if they've got little fans and heat sinks or anything like that, heat is still going to be a really big issue for these USB drives, especially compared to an actual computer, which will be bringing in loads of cool air via the intake fans, and that's going to help cool the NVMe slots. And there's also a lot more spaces in computer systems to actually help cool the NVMe drives, unlike these USB 3 enclosures where things are just a lot more limited and heat is an issue. But if you have to go down this route, it could work, but I'd just say read the reviews carefully and probably pay a little bit more. I wouldn't just go out and spend, £15 or $15 on some random no-name one with mixed reviews. I'd prefer to spend a bit more money, maybe for a 2-bay one from a more reputable company, because I think that's going to be better in the long run. The other option is to go out and actually build or buy an NVMe NAS. And then you've got storage accessible throughout your entire house. And obviously there's loads of different ways of achieving this. There are some ready-built NVMe boxes you can buy, although they usually are quite expensive. But the route I actually went for was I built my own. So this is my HomeLab NAS. I'll just move the chair out of the way. But I actually built my own. So this is my HomeLab NAS, and basically this was a fairly budget build. The motherboard is ASRock. It's not particularly expensive. I went for a refurbished PSU, which I'll talk about in another video because I'm still a bit on the fence about whether I should have done that. But I specifically bought this motherboard because it has 3 NVMe slots on there, and then it's got a free expansion card slot for PCI Express as well. So potentially I could have 7 free slots for my NVMe drives, which could give me up to 28 terabytes of usable space if I went with 4 terabyte drives. And yes, that's unformatted space. In reality, it's going to be slightly less than that, but actually building your own can be quite a good option because obviously you can customize things as you would like as well. So that's what I've done here with my HomeLab NAS, and I show that off in another video, but that's actually a really good way of getting more space in your system. But of course, there's downsides to that too. One of the big downsides is it costs a lot more money than simply going out and buying a 8 terabyte drive even and sticking it in your computer. You've got to buy a new case, you've got to buy a new power supply unit, more RAM, more motherboards, more case fans, all of that stuff. You've got to buy all of that. So that clearly is a bit of a flaw with going out and building your own NVMe NAS. Yes, it brings loads of benefits, and if you're into home lab stuff and building computers and tinkering, then it's a really fun option, and that's why I did it personally. But obviously, if you just want one computer and maximize the storage on just one computer, which I totally get, then building your own, home lab NAS for NVMe space isn't going to work very well. But that's why I covered those other methods. And I think personally, changing your motherboard to have 3 to 5 NVMe slots, because some motherboards do have those 5 slots, that can be a really good option. And then if you need more space, you should then get the PCI Express expansion card, which can give you up to 4 more NVMe drives. What I would caution though is if you go with a micro ATX build, you might only be able to access one of the PCI Express slots, even if the motherboard says it has 2 PCI Express slots. And that's because micro ATX builds are smaller and the motherboards are smaller, and often the graphics cards, if you've got a fairly good graphics card, that's going to potentially cover the other PCI Express slot. And I found that out with my old computer case and my old motherboard, which is why I actually upgraded it to this particular case. But I discussed some of the flaws with micro ATX builds in another video if you wanted to check that out. And I also, if you wanted to stay with your build, I discussed some ways that you can access that other PCI Express slot, even if your graphics card is covering it, in another video if you wanted to check that out. And I hope you enjoyed. this video. If you did, please click the thumbs up button and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.